Data compression is another term you're going to hear. You'll probably see this on the exam. You'll hear it in real life. You'll read about it in the documentation about data warehousing, especially on the Microsoft SQL Server platform. So let's talk about what you need to understand about data compression here. First of all, obviously SQL Server 2012 supports data compression, and this is not exactly rocket science. It simply uses just kind of standard compression techniques to reduce the size of the database. Now, really what this is going to do is pack more data onto a few data pages or less data pages. Now, it's doing compression. Well, I'll talk about it in just a few minutes. We'll get down there. Let me get ahead of myself here. If I have fewer data pages out there, then that means there's going to be fewer data page reads required to satisfy my queries. And if there's fewer data page reads, then that means that the whole process happens faster and more efficiently. That means fewer IOs or input-output reads, which means faster response and a lower processing load on the server. And all of those things are good, right? Now, there is one minor issue that you always need to keep in mind with data compression is you do consume a few extra CPU or processor resources for data updates because the data has to be decompressed, changed, and then recompressed. So if you're kind of working with the data a whole lot, with inserts, changes, deletes, any of those sorts of things, you're going to get a little bit of a hit there with extra CPU time to do this compression. And this is generally, though, not a problem in data warehousing because we're not making a lot of changes to the data. We're simply bulk loading data once a week, once a month, however often you're doing it, and then the data pretty much remains unchanged. Now, just for your information and to help you kind of get through any detailed questions on the exam, you need to be aware that SQL Server 2012 supports 3 compression types. There's page compression, and this is where it just looks for duplicate values within the data page. Just think of that as duplicate values in your table, and you'll have this in a data warehouse because we're not so concerned about duplicate data as we are about denormalized data that we can query much more efficiently. It's going to focus on the duplicate values within that data page, and it's going to store one of those values, and it's going to place a pointer for all the other instances of that value to that one that it's stored. And so we're going to store the value once and then a much, much smaller pointer at all the other locations for that same data. And then you can do row compression. And row compression happens when we remove any unused bytes in a fixed data type. Now think about this. If we've got a char25 data type out there, meaning we've got fixed 25 bytes set aside for space, but when we put data in there we only used, say, 10 bytes. Well, there's 15 bytes of wasted space. It will remove that on row compression. Then there's Unicode compression. And you don't hear about Unicode compression a whole lot, but it is out there. And all it's doing, if you understand Unicode, the data sets that are out there for data, for your characters is twice as large. Instead of being 8-bit, it's 16-bit. But even though you've turned Unicode on, sometimes some of the data that's out there doesn't really require that extra space for Unicode, and it will simply reclaim that space. Now, here's kind of where it comes into play for you, especially on the exam. What compression should you use? Generally, you should use page compression because it will automatically implement row compression when you're using page compression. But if you use row compression, then you can't use page compression. I hope that makes sense. So the bottom line, use page, it will implement row along with it. And the fact tables usually tend to benefit the most from compression. That's a general rule. Just kind of watch for that on the exam. Simply because the facts tables tend to be larger, and they get larger and larger and larger, and they have some duplicate data in them. Now, there's a note that you need to watch for on the exam and in real life. Compression is only available in SQL Server Enterprise Edition. So if you got Standard Edition or any of the others, you're not going to have compression. So don't let them trip you up with that one on the exam, okay? If you're not familiar with compression or you want to know more, just go out to Books Online, do a search for data compression, look at all the details, and you'll see how to implement it. Very easy to implement. You can turn it on in the SQL Server Management Studio. Just right click on the table. You'll see storage. Choose that link and then go out there and you can see a wizard to help you figure out the compression you need to use. But anyway, data compression is going to be used in data warehouses. You could see this on the exam. You absolutely need to be aware of this in real life. So just dig into this a little bit and give it a try.